I know a secret weapon that can be used to help reduce very real social inequities. The only complication is this secret weapon happens to live in virtual worlds and video games. No, I'm not talking about digital plasma cannons or BFGs, big friendly guns. I'm talking about avatars. Avatars, virtual representations of your behavior and your appearance in digital environments, kind of like the social media profiles that many of you customize and cultivate every day, but a little bit more embodied, like a video game character. There's a phenomenon called the Proteus Effect, which suggests that when people use an avatar with certain identity characteristics, they conform to those the identity characteristics behavioral associations. Let me explain with some examples. If you use a taller avatar in a virtual environment, you're more likely to negotiate aggressively, not only during avatar use, but afterwards as well. If you use a less attractive avatar, you'll have less social confidence. You'll stand farther away from people. If you see yourself in an older avatar, you'll choose a more conservative investment portfolio. If you use an inventor avatar, you'll actually come up with more creative solutions to a problem. If you see your avatar gain or lose weight while exercising, it will affect how much you exercise for a full week after that virtual experience. So clearly, this Proteus effect influences us outside of the avatar use context and in multiple domains. As part of my research, I study how the Proteus effect can be harnessed to reduce the harmful effects of stereotypes in the context of education. Imagine that you are an undergraduate student. That shouldn't be hard for many of you. And let's say this half of the room comes into my lab to participate in a study about research, and I tell you to customize an avatar. Customize a male avatar. This half of the room, I say customize a female avatar. Simple instruction. And then you play Wii Sword Play. Has anyone played before? Any hands? A couple people? Yeah, all right, cool. It's a fun little game. You battle an enemy in the Wii Sword Play land for 5-8 minutes, and then you do a survey. And there are some math questions on the survey that you have to do in your head. And I tell you, this half of the room, you're going to have your scores on this math test compared to this half of the room. Male avatar customizers against female avatar customizers. And what do I find? Well, you guys do better, and you guys don't. Sorry. Why is that? That's weird. Number one, it's because of something called Stereotype Threat, which is the idea that when people are reminded of a stereotype that applies to their group, their demographic, it influences how they behave. In this case, the stereotype that women aren't as good as men at math makes women perform worse on a math test when they're reminded of that stereotype. This has been found in hundreds of studies in many different domains. But this study is weird. It's the avatar's identity that is influencing your performance. Why would that happen? Well, by customizing the avatar, by putting identity characteristics into it, you actually influence your own self-perception, at least for a short amount of time after avatar use. I thought this was pretty interesting, and I wanted to study another stereotype that relates to the context of video games. The stereotype that women are not as good as men in video games. This stereotype is just plain false. Many studies, including my own, with thousands of participants in multiple countries, have found the number one factor that influences success in a video game is the amount of time you spend playing in a video game. If you compare men and women playing video games, it looks like men do better than women until you control or consider statistically the amount of time spent playing. Then that gender difference goes away. What does this suggest? Well, women play competitive action-oriented games less than men, partially because of the stereotype that they don't belong or cannot succeed in those spaces. And I wondered, does this stereotype have effects outside of the context of video games? Imagine again that you are an undergraduate student, you come to my lab, this half of the room, I say read an article which says, new study finds women are worse than men at video games. That's the stereotype. This half of the room, you read an article, it says women are just as good as men at video games, contradicting the stereotype. Then the experiment has another manipulation. This time, the front of the room, I tell you are going to be playing a shooter game against an opponent. He is right down the hall. I need to finish with his paperwork. When I get back to you, we'll start the study. The back half of the room, I make you believe you're playing against a woman. She is right down the hall, etc. In all cases, it's just a computer set at the same skill level for all participants. By making you believe you're playing against a man, or by having you read the article about the stereotype, I'm triggering the stereotype in you, the participant. And what do we find? When we trigger the stereotype threat, you play the game worse. You might expect this from the math study, right? More interesting than that, when we trigger this stereotype, compared to your survey responses before you played, you say, you say computer science, technology, engineering, and math fields are better suited for men than for women. So by triggering the stereotype in the context of video games, we elicit the stereotype in the context of these technical fields. Let me take a step back here and talk about the big picture. There's a stereotype that women aren't as good as men in video games. This stereotype is part of a vicious cycle. I believe it leads women to play less, especially competitive action-oriented games, which happen to be the games that lead most directly to technical thinking and developing technical skills. And if they spend less time playing these games, they develop less skill in the games, which then reinforces the stereotype. And this vicious cycle is not relegated just to the context of video games, but it reinforces the stereotypes about those technical fields. Following the same logic, we might expect that gender disparity in those technical fields, which is very prevalent, especially in our country, is partially caused by the stereotypes about gender in video games. This is nuts. Might I say, this is knucking futs, right? Video games are a context of leisure, of fun. It should be an equal playing ground. But the stereotypes about gender in that context, I think, have very real consequences outside of the digital space. What can we do about it? I know a secret weapon, remember? It happens to live in virtual worlds and video games, avatars. Imagine one last time that you're a participant in my lab. This half of you, I ask you to customize an avatar to represent your identity. This half of you, I ask to customize an avatar to represent the story of the game. You're going to play a space alien shooting game, so make a space alien shooting avatar. Okay? What do we find? For this half of you, same pattern as before. Compared to before the game, your survey responses about how well women are suited for STEM fields goes down. But this half of you, we have the opposite effect. Compared to before you played the game, you say women are better suited for these technical fields. By de-emphasizing the stereotyped identity characteristics through your avatar, we are able to reduce your susceptibility to stereotype threat. So what does this say? Well, in general, we should all just be our empowered virtual selves. To an extent, with a caveat, I give my students avatars to communicate with each other in class. I've done this in multiple studies. One consistent finding is that the students who make their avatars too ideal, too studious, compared to how they perceive their actual selves, actually do worse in the class. So, I think avatars should be empowered but achievable. If it's too ideal, it's a reminder of an unachievable state of self. So we should all just be our empowered but achievable virtual selves. And we should remember that avatars are a secret weapon that we can use to promote social equity in our society, especially given the mosaic and diversity that we want to promote. And to help you remember that, I'm going to wrap this talk up, and I guess the whole thing up, with a rap. I've got a different kind of intro for this presentation, outro. It's kind of strange, but please be patient. I'm gonna rhyme out the roots of my inspiration to study avatars for empowerment and education. My PhD is in communication, focused on avatars, self-representations within media. People love to create them. They're the user's embodiment to which they relate when they engage in tasks that affect self-perception, like with Stereotype Threat. From gender to complexion, avatars influence performance and the direction of people's self-efficacy. It's a reflection of how learners should be guided in their introspection to have confidence when they find concepts perplexing and to recognize that they're not the lone exception but can collaborate to enhance their perception. I want to test this from atom to bit manifestations, from brick and mortar to virtual instantiations, from small seminars to MOOC-like creations, from in classrooms to informal learning locations, from our country to any other nation. My eventual goal is worldwide application, achieved through the scholarly dissemination of avatars for empowerment and education.